Transforming bracket!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is obviously part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. Done such directors in the past, just as Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, Wes Anderson, Christopher Nolan. The list goes on. You guys can check those directors and many, many more in my director playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video, so you know this time around I am focusing on Antoine Fuqua's films and ranking them from worst to best. Now, as of the filming of this video, which by the way is December of 2022, Antoine Fuqua has done 15 films. So I'll be doing 15 being his worst to 1 being his best, and of course my opinion. Now keep in mind, again, if you're new to the channel, this will not include any short films, TV shows, music videos, none of that. Specifically films, feature-length films, I might add. So guys, enough exposition. Let's get started. So, kicking things off with number 15, we have Infinite. This is a movie you must avoid at all costs, unless you're like myself and you said, you know what, I'm going to watch all of Antoine Fuqua's movies. Besides that, there is no reason to watch this. It is a terrible, terrible movie. Avoid at all costs. And that's why it's my number 15. Next up, we have my number 14, which is The Replacement Killers. Now, look, I don't like this movie at all. But I will say this. The reason why I don't have this as my number 15 and instead have Infinite is because The Replacement Killers was still very, very early in Fuqua's career. But that being said, it is still a movie that is written with terrible action scenes. And given the cast and the people that have a background, I might add, in fight choreography, you would think that that would be the opposite. At the bare minimum, good action scenes. Nope, not the case. The Replacement Killers, not a good film in the slightest. I really did not like this movie. That's why it's my number 14. Next up, my number 13, we have Bait. So Bait is still fresh in my mind. I watched this less than a week ago. This is a movie that it's very, very frustrating because on one hand, you have David Morse hamming things up as like a cop that's like trying to bring down the bad guys who got that gold, and he's doing his all. It's great to see him. But then you have Jamie Foxx, who I like, by the way. I have to state that. I really like Jamie Foxx. But my goodness, watching him in this movie, terrible. Absolutely terrible. He's given so much dialogue that's attempting to be comedic, but it falls flat. And let me say this. Jamie Foxx can be quite funny. So to see him in a role where he's given this preposterous dialogue that doesn't work, it's frustrating. But he tried. He really did try. But I can't say the same for the rest of this movie. Also, this has to be one of the dumbest endings I have seen in recent memory. Holy cow. Just you wait until you get to that ending. It is bad. It's really bad. And that's why it's my number 13. Next up, we have my number 12. I know this is going to get a lot of people angry, and I apologize in advance, but my number 12 is Tears of the Sun with Bruce Willis. I know a lot of people that eat up the war genre, and this is one of those movies where when you look on Rotten Tomatoes, you see audiences love it, and then you see critics hate it. And I was kind of hoping that I was going to lean more towards audiences with this one, but I leaned actually a lot towards the critics with this one. Bruce Willis was fine. The cinematography was striking. Really liked that aspect. But everything else, it was just kind of like pretty cliche. And yeah, which was kind of difficult for me to kind of get invested because of just how many war genre cliches there were. And it didn't really try to elevate it either. It was just kind of like, yeah, here we go. Here's a cliche. And it's like, okay, I don't know. I can see why some people would like this, but for me, didn't like it. And that's why it's my number 12. Next up, my number 11, this is Olympus Has Fallen, a movie that is entertaining, surface-based kind of entertainment. But that being said, it's not a good movie. I like it better than White House Down, I will say. But this is one of those movies where you turn your brain off, you watch it, 2 hours later you forget about it. That's why it's where it's at. By no means do I hate it. Was I slightly disappointed by it? Yeah, but I also did have fun with it. The R rating definitely was warranted, and I like that it did utilize the R rating in a very effective way. Gerard Butler also just was quite an enjoyable performance that he gave in this movie. Like, definitely something that is worth watching for that alone. But definitely not a good movie, so to speak. That's why it's my number 11. Next up, my number 10. This is going to pain me to say, but my number 10 is Emancipation, which I watched about an hour ago as of filming this video. And I was quite looking forward to this movie because I think that this time period of America history is something that I find it fascinating when a director tackles it. And I was curious to see what Fuqua was going to bring to the table, as well as Will Smith. Slap aside, he is someone that when you hear about him making a movie, you can't help but say, okay, I'm going to watch this. But also, Robert Richardson is the cinematographer who did this movie. The same director that works with Tarantino, and also did, the cinematography for JFK. I have much respect for him. But unfortunately, this movie I was disappointed by. But it's not a complete wash because the performances are fine. The production design, costume design, makeup, those are all really, really good. And Robert Richardson does things with the cinematography that I feel mixed about. But I also respect that he was trying something new in terms of this particular genre. Like, he has it where the cinematography, it's not black and white quite. It's just really, really desaturated to the point where it's like, why don't you just make it black and white? But it's something that didn't 100% work for me, but I admire him attempting something new. But the rest of the movie, unfortunately, is poorly paced, and the directing is surprisingly safe. It's like, my goodness, like, it didn't know if it wanted to be an action movie or a drama movie. And I think that because of that conflict of the tones, it didn't really work in the slightest. Now, speaking of tone, I will say that the serious-minded tone of the movie did match the cinematography, and I do think that was warranted, and it made sense. But it's just one of those movies, man, where while watching it, I felt the length. I felt what was it, 132-minute runtime? I felt it, unfortunately. But again, it's disappointing, but it does have its merits with some of the filmmaking. And that's why I have it at number 10. Next up, my number 9. This is a hard one to talk about, but my number 9 is The Guilty. The Guilty is a remake. And I do think that the original is definitely better. But I will say the remake is one of those movies that if you haven't seen the original, I think that you'll quite enjoy. And Jake Gyllenhaal gives a great performance per usual. It goes without saying. But other than that, there's not really much to say about this movie. If you've seen the original, there really isn't much reasoning to watch this remake because it does follow the original very heavily. But again, you do get to see Jake Gyllenhaal work in a one-setting environment and do a great job. And that's why it is my number 9. Next up, my number 8 is The Equalizer 2. So The Equalizer 2, I feel mixed about, but overall I would say disappointed by at the same time because I do like The Equalizer quite a bit. So watching the second one and seeing that stylistic, sleek-looking cinematography is just gone that was in the first one, and it's just gone in the second one. It was just kind of like, okay, well, this is just disappointing. And then on top of that, the action is very forgettable. If you put a gun to my head and said, name one action scene in The Equalizer 2, I would be like, I don't know. Versus the first one, if you put a gun to my head, I would be able to name 3 right off the top of my head. Just saying. You have one job with an action movie, make it well choreographed, memorable. I guess that's 2 jobs. But you know what I'm saying? Like, The Equalizer 2 was just a frustrating sequel. If they are making a third one, I do hope that it's much better. But as it stands, The Equalizer 2, it's a joy to watch Denzel Washington do his thing. But at the same time, there's really not much reasoning to watch this movie. It's very much so a mixed bag for me. And that's why it's my number 8. Next up, my number 7, we have Southpaw, which, similar to Guilty, we have a great Jake Gyllenhaal performance, which makes watching this movie worth watching for that alone. But on top of that, you have cinematography that at the time I wasn't a big fan of when I saw it in theaters, but in retrospect, I do respect how stylish it looks. And I do also think that serious-minded tone of the movie is warranted. That being said, it's a very, very, very cliche sports movie. So depending on how you like your sports movies and depending on how you're accepting of the sports cliches, that will also depend on how much you'll like this movie. For me, again, the stylish cinematography and the performance by Jake Gyllenhaal, it makes worth watching alone. But it's not a movie I've had any interest in rewatching just because, again, it is a pretty cliche movie. But still, might be worth checking out. That's why it's my number 7. Next up, my number 6, we have Shooter, which is a Mark Wahlberg starring performance. And this is one of those movies where it's entertaining. It's turn your brain off kind of action. The action is interesting, but doesn't really stick with you. There's no real lasting impact that you'll have watching it. It's one of those movies where you enjoyed it for 2 hours, and then an hour later, someone said, "Oh, did you watch the movie?" And you're like, "I think I did. Did I?" That's kind of Shooter in a nutshell. But again, while watching it, you'll be entertained, and that's why it's my number 6. Next up, we have number 5, which is Brooklyn's Finest, a premise, I should say, that is so intriguing that unfortunately it's not able to match that intriguing premise. But I will say I was still engaged by this movie. I liked seeing all the different performances. It's one of those things where I couldn't help, this is going to sound crazy, but I couldn't help but think about PTA's early work, such as like Magnolia and Boogie Nights, where you have a bunch of different characters from all walks of life, doing their thing. And, just that kind of style of filmmaking I love. I absolutely adore it. And maybe that's a disservice to Brooklyn's Finest because it's no PTA movie. And nor would I expect it to be, truth be told. But I couldn't help but think about that, the potential that it had. It's one of those movies where I enjoyed watching it for sure, but I just couldn't help but also feel that there are a lot of cliches in this movie. And Brooklyn's Finest isn't really able to rise above them. But that being said, great performances. Just like some of these other movies I mentioned, the serious-minded tone is something that I really liked. And I do think that performance-wise, my goodness, Ethan Hawke is so good. He's a national treasure, man, I tell you. But that's why it's my number 5. Next up, we have number 4, which is The Magnificent Seven, which I have seen twice. Great James Horner score. Last one, R.I.P. that he did. Good performances, entertaining action. Pretty hard-hitting, too, for PG-13. Is it better than the original? That's up for you as audience members to decide, truth be told. I haven't seen the original Magnificent Seven in quite a long time, so I can't really say. But I will say Magnificent Seven is definitely worth your time watching. It's an entertaining Western. And let's be honest, we don't really get many studio blockbusters that are Westerns. So definitely worth checking out. And that's why it's my number 4. Next up, my number 3. This is going to surprise many, but my number 3 is King Arthur. Yeah, I have a soft spot for this movie because I know that it's flawed. I know it has its issues, but my goodness, is it a stylish feat to behold? Like, I absolutely adore the look of this movie. Now, I will say what I also enjoyed was that it does, in some aspects, kind of fall into cliches, which I don't like. But in other aspects, it also does kind of challenge viewers and does kind of feel different from other medieval time kind of movies, especially with its view on religion. I thought that was quite fascinating, especially for when this movie came out. Hans Zimmer's score is great. And also, this is worth noting, definitely watch the director's cut of this movie because that is where you can see all of the action that was intended. And by that, I mean that the original, the theatrical cut, is PG-13. So it's kind of watered down, but when you watch the director's cut, you're like, oh, so it's supposed to be this gritty looking? Oh, cool. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, this is a movie that has, a couple standout action scenes where it's like, that is really cool, but you want to watch it in the main format of the director's cut. So please, if you're going to check this movie out, please do watch the director's cut. That's why it's my number 3. Next up, my number 2. This is going to anger some people, and I do apologize in advance. But my number 2, I know is going to be a lot of people's number 1, and I can respect that. But my number 2 is Training Day. Training Day, I like a lot. I think that Ethan Hawke and Denzel Washington's rapport is palpable. You just can't help but be engaged by these two. And I do think that the movie not only rests on their shoulders, but it's just something that by the end, when you see these two rapport, like it's incredible stuff. And I also really think that the other aspects of the filmmaking is good. It's just not a movie I love. I get why many people do love this movie, but for me, it just didn't reach that height. I just think it's a good movie. And I do look forward to rewatching it for sure. But it's my number 2. Next up, my number 1, I know this is going to surprise a lot of people, but my number 1 is The Equalizer. This is, when people say Antoine Fuqua's name, this is what I think of. Stylish action. Memorable action. I mean, for crying out loud, that Home Depot wannabe action scene, that was great. Just that standout alone when he's, visiting, I might be able to see in the back cover, when he's visiting, for the first time and he unleashes fury and you get to see for the first time what he is about and how he's not just an old man. It's just great stuff. The score, oh my goodness, the score is great. Denzel Washington does his thing and it works so good. It's a movie also that, yeah, I know it got a sequel, but it also works on its own. Like, I watch this and I never say to myself, yeah, I should rewatch the second one. And, oh, yeah, I'm looking forward to a third one. It's like, no, this is good stuff. The reason why I have this higher than Training Day is because rewatchability value for me, which I know people are like, no, Training Day is more rewatchable. I gotta say, the Equalizer I've seen like 3-4 times, maybe even a fifth time, versus Training Day I've seen one time. The rewatchability value is important for me. So I gotta give it to the Equalizer. But again, I know that some people are gonna disagree with that, and that's fine. Which leads me to say this. I want to hear your guys' ranking of Antoine Fuqua's movies down below. Please do tell me. The other thing I wanted to mention is I try to, with these director ranking lists, I try to talk about the director himself, and if I'm a fan of his or not. And Antoine Fuqua, I will say that I like that with some of his movies, he does unleash that stylistic tendencies that he has. And I do also think that he knows the type of actors to work with. And he works with a lot of the same actors like Ethan Hawke, Denzel Washington, and I like it. I like it a lot that he works with them because, they're clearly well-versed. And I like that quite a bit. I will say, though, that the filmmaking aspects of his movies are sometimes inconsistent. And I will say that they're also very light in that many of his movies are one-time watches for me because they're just not that memorable. They're pretty forgettable, unfortunately. And that does kind of affect my personal viewing. And many of his movies, unfortunately, are like that. But he is a director that when I hear his name, I say to myself, yeah, I'm going to check that out for sure. But he's not a top-tier director, but he is someone that I do respect. And probably one of the reasons why I did this ranking. But guys, again, let me know your ranking of Antoine Fuqua's down below. And don't forget to hit the subscription, notification bell, follow me on Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.